You know somebody like this. Maybe you are somebody like this. Election season rolls around and everybody around you turns into a cable news pundit. Your coworker is posting essays on social media, your neighbor has a yard sign, your cousin won't stop sending group texts about how the country is falling apart. And you change the channel. Not because you're uninformed, not because you don't understand what's happening. You just don't care. Or at least, that's what it looks like from the outside. I'm Frank, and today we're going to talk about something that's been quietly sitting in the corner of every Gen X conversation for about 30 years: political apathy. Not the kind where you never learned how government works, the kind where you learned exactly how it works and decided it wasn't worth your energy. And the weird part is, a lot of you don't even feel guilty about it. Let's start with the behavior, because the behavior is what people notice first. You might vote. Plenty of you do. In 2024, adults in the Gen X age range turned out at roughly 65% in the presidential election. That's not terrible. It's higher than millennials, way higher than Gen Z. But here's the thing people miss. Showing up at the polls and caring about politics are two completely different things. A lot of you vote the way you take your car in for an oil change. You do it because you're supposed to, not because you're excited about it. You don't put stickers on your bumper, you don't argue at Thanksgiving, you don't have a candidate you actually believe in. You just pick one, fill in the circle, and go home. And when someone asks you about it, the answer is almost always some version of the same thing. They're all the same. Nothing ever changes. I've got my own stuff to deal with. That's not laziness. That's a decision. And it was made a long time before anyone handed you a ballot. Let's go back. If you were born between 1965 and 1980, the first president you probably remember is either Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan. Carter walked in with good intentions and walked out looking exhausted. Inflation was running wild. Gas lines were everywhere. The Iran hostage crisis played out on the nightly news for over a year. And if you were a kid watching your parents watch the news, the message was pretty clear. The person running the country couldn't fix it. Then Reagan showed up. And whether your household loved him or hated him, the country shifted underneath your feet. The economy changed, the tone changed, the whole idea of what government was supposed to do changed. Reagan didn't just win elections, he rewired what people expected from leadership. Government wasn't the solution, government was the problem. That line didn't just land with voters, it sank into the groundwater, and you were growing up drinking from that well. But here's what really got you. Before you were old enough to vote, you'd already watched the adults around you lose faith in the people in charge. Watergate happened before most of you were born or while you were still small. But Watergate didn't end with Nixon. It changed the way the entire country talked about politicians. The assumption flipped. Before Watergate, the default assumption was that whoever was in charge was probably doing his best. After Watergate, the default assumption was that whoever was in charge was probably lying. Your parents absorbed that. And they passed it down, not in a speech, but in a sigh, in the way they rolled their eyes when a politician came on TV, in the way they stopped talking about voting like it mattered. I've been working on something on the side, a book called Psychology of Gen X. It covers a lot of the things I couldn't fit into a single video, like how your parents' generation wired you for certain habits, and what those habits look like now. It's in the description if you want to check it out. Then came the 80s. You watched Iran-Contra unfold. The president's own administration was secretly selling weapons to Iran and funneling the money to rebels in Central America. Congress held hearings. Oliver North showed up in uniform and basically told the country he'd do it all again. Nobody went to prison for very long. And the takeaway for a teenager watching this was not that the system worked. The takeaway was that the system bends for the people running it. Then came the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. Then came Clinton, and whatever your politics were, the 90s taught you one more lesson. Even the ones you liked were going to disappoint you. A journalist named Jonathan Cohn wrote about this in 1992. He said people were wrong about Gen X being apathetic. He argued that this generation cared deeply about real issues: economic fairness, racism, the environment. The problem wasn't a lack of values. The problem was that no one in power had ever shown this generation what a functioning government actually looked like. You'd grown up in a world where every institution was either corrupt, incompetent, or both. Why would you sign up for that? And the data backed him up.
In a 1999 piece for The Atlantic, a writer named Ted Halstead called your generation the most politically disengaged in American history. In 1994, the year the Republican Revolution swept Congress, only 20% of Gen Xers voted in the midterm election. 2 years later, only about a third of you voted in the presidential election. Compare that to 1972, when half of Americans between 18 and 24 showed up to vote. Something had clearly changed, and it wasn't that you were stupid. It was that you didn't believe it mattered. A lot of you have been in the comments sharing stories about your childhood, your parents, stuff you never connected until now. That's actually what made me sit down and write a book about it. Psychology of Gen X. It's in the description. Now here's where it gets psychological. In 1998, two researchers at Stanford, David Gruski and Eric Rice, ran a study to figure out if the cynical slacker label was actually true. They used the General Social Survey and compared Gen X adults aged 18 to 29 with boomers and older adults who had answered the same questions when they were the same age. What they found was interesting. Gen X did show higher levels of cynicism than previous generations at the same point in their lives, but the researchers also found something nobody was talking about. Cynicism was on the rise across every age group. It wasn't just a Gen X thing, it was an everybody thing. Gen X just got there first. The researchers had a name for it. They called it historical underdosing. The idea was that the big regenerative movements of the past, civil rights, feminism, the anti-war movement, had already been fought, and what was left was decay. The feeling that the great struggles were behind you, and all that remained was watching the institutions wind down. If you grew up feeling like you'd arrived too late for the revolution and too early for whatever comes next, that's not apathy. That's timing.
And this is where upbringing matters. Not in the ways people always talk about. The real thing that shaped your relationship with politics was the emotional architecture of your childhood. A lot of you grew up in homes where the adults were dealing with their own chaos. Money was tight, parents were stressed, the rules were either rigid and inconsistent or barely there at all. And what you learned from that was simple. Figure it out yourself. Nobody is coming to save you. That belief doesn't just shape how you handle a flat tire or a job loss. It shapes how you see every system that claims to be working on your behalf. If your earliest emotional training was you're on your own, why would you expect government to be any different? And there is something else. Your generation was the first to be heavily marketed to as children. Saturday morning cartoons were basically toy commercials, and then heavily marketed to as teenagers. By the time political campaigns started using the same techniques, you could smell it. The slogans, the manufactured outrage, the focus grouped answers. You'd been trained by advertisers your whole life to recognize when someone was selling you something, and politics felt like another sales pitch. I wrote something I've been meaning to write for a while, a short book called Psychology of Gen X. It traces the things you do today back to the rooms and the people that built those habits into you. If that sounds interesting, links in the description. Now let's talk about what this looks like today, because you're not 25 anymore. You're somewhere between 45 and 60, and the political landscape has changed dramatically. Here's the irony. The generation that walked away from politics is now living with the consequences of that walkout. Social Security is shaky, healthcare costs are brutal, retirement savings are behind where they should be. A study from the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that only about 22% of Gen Xers felt very confident they'd be able to retire comfortably, and 78% were worried Social Security wouldn't be there when they needed it. These are political problems. Every one of them runs through Congress, through state legislatures, through policy decisions that get made while you're looking the other way. But even now, even with the stakes this personal, a lot of you still can't bring yourselves to engage. Not fully, not with any real belief that it will help. And that's the piece that confuses younger generations. Millennials and Gen Z look at your age group and don't understand how you can be so close to the consequences and still not fight harder. But they didn't grow up watching what you watched. They didn't internalize the same lesson you did, that the machine doesn't respond to you, that voting is choosing between two flavors of the same thing, that the people who win are the people who are always going to win, and your job is just to survive the outcome. That's not logic.
That's a wound dressed up as a worldview. Because here's the thing, Gen X didn't start out not caring. You started out paying attention, and then you watched over and over again as paying attention didn't change anything. The people who promised to fix things didn't fix them. The people who said they were different turned out to be the same. And eventually you stopped being disappointed because you stopped expecting anything. That's not apathy, that's protection. A writer covering this topic for CBS News put it in a way that stung. Talking about how Bill Clinton energized young Gen X voters in 1992, pulling in 52% of the under 25 vote, a Gen X author described Clinton as their generation's first real political love. And then he broke their hearts. And after that, trusting a politician the same way again just didn't feel possible. Pew Research found something telling in 2014. When they surveyed different generations, only 49% of Gen Xers said they consider themselves part of a unique generation. That was lower than boomers at 58% and millennials at 61%. Half of your generation doesn't even think of itself as a generation. You're so used to being overlooked that you've stopped claiming space, even your own. And when it comes to politics, that translates into something specific. You don't organize, you don't rally, you don't form movements. You vote or you don't. You scroll past the headlines or you read them quietly, but you don't put your name on anything. Because putting your name on something means believing in something, and believing in something means you can be let down again. So what do you do with this? Look, this isn't a call to go volunteer for a campaign. That's not what this is about. But there's a difference between being strategic about where you put your energy and being checked out entirely. And a lot of you crossed that line a long time ago without even noticing. The independence your generation is known for, the self-reliance, the skepticism, the built-in radar for anyone trying to manipulate you, those are real strengths, but they only work if they're aimed at something. Skepticism without action is just resignation with a better vocabulary. You don't have to believe in the system to use it. You don't have to trust a candidate to hold them accountable. And you definitely don't have to care about politics the way the news wants you to care about it, non-stop, panicked, tribal. But you do have to decide if sitting out is still serving you, or if it's just a habit you picked up when you were too young to pick anything else. Quick thing before I go, I put together a book called Psychology of Gen X. It came out of doing this channel and realizing there was a bigger story connecting all of these topics. If you want to take a look, it's linked below. Your generation figured out early that the world wasn't going to hand you anything. Fine, but somewhere between figuring that out and where you are now, some of you decided the only move was to stop reaching, and the world kept moving without you. You're still here. The question is whether you want to be in the room when the decisions get made, or if you're okay hearing about it later the way you always have. Thanks for watching. YouTube recommends you watch this video next. See you there.